Let me start with Don Luskin. Don, you know, there's a lead story on Bloomberg News. I'm very fair-minded. It says this: the LIBOR at 4.95% is way above the ECB, the European Central Bank, target rate of 4%. It's way above the Fed's target rate of 4.25%. And even though it's come down slightly since all this Federal Reserve, International Bank liquidity hullabaloo, it is still awfully high and suggests that they don't have the story down right with respect to the credit clogging and LIBOR. And let me add commercial paper here at home. Don, what is your take about this Fed story with the ECB and LIBOR and the Fed funds rate?
You know, what the Fed announced yesterday morning with this year-end liquidity facility was exactly the right thing to do, but it was so terribly timed. They should have done it 2 weeks ago. They should not have done it the morning after an FOMC meeting, especially the morning after a meeting that was received so badly by the markets. It gives every impression and possibly reveals the reality that they are confused and uncoordinated. And a credit crisis is, as much as anything else, a crisis of confidence. We need confidence in our leaders. We cannot have a Federal Reserve that appears to not know what it's doing, to do one thing on one day, then another thing the next morning. You know, Alan Greenspan had his faults, but, man, he had a firm hand on the tiller. So now we're in the Bernanke years. He promised transparency. You got it. And I don't like what I see through this transparent window. It's a sausage factory. It's probably always been that way, but the markets shouldn't have to see it.
Dougie Cass's recession. You see that recession, Don?
So now, which Dougie Cass recession is this one? This is the one he was predicting 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, or now?
Doug?
Which one are we talking about?
Doug, please weigh in.
You know, 2 years ago, everyone dismissed my concerns about housing. A year and a half ago, Don and Larry dismissed my concerns about slime and its likely impact in terms of moving above the ladder of credit.
We were talking about recessions, Doug. We were talking about recessions.
And the delta of the economy. Excuse me. Let me answer the question.
Well, the question was about recession.
Is very clear. We've gone from 5% GDP growth in the third quarter to probably 1 or 1.5%, and according to Morgan Stanley, negative in both the first quarter and the second quarter of next year. Durable good orders.
Okay, so the recession we're talking about is the one that hasn't happened
technology.
Yet. The recession we're talking about is the one that Morgan Stanley predicts. Well, I'm sorry, does Morgan Stanley have a crystal ball? Is that what you rely on? Why don't we have Morgan Stanley on the show instead of you? What do you think?
Richard Byrne is much smarter than me on the economy because I'm not an economist.
But what about guys like Brian? What about Brian Raspberry and Bob Stein over at First Trust? What about John Riding and Dave Malpass?
I spoke to Brian.
You think Malpass is a smart guy?
Well, hold on a second.
Is not. What about Don Luskin and Dave Gitlitz over at Trend Macro? Because actually, when you look at their shop, it may not be as large as the other shops. In my view and in our viewers' view, they have had a very good track record on this non-recession economy, which one might even call the boom. One might even call it the Bush boom, including the supply-side tax cuts. Why not listen to Don Luskin? Where's your disagreement with Don? Don, you don't disagree about the mortgage problem and the housing problem. You're just saying it's bigger than that. Is that right?
I'm telling you that if you look at the last 7 GDP quarters, which are the quarters where housing has made a negative contribution, and you look at the other 95% of the economy other than housing, that other 95% has had its best 7 quarters cumulatively during this whole expansion, during the time that housing has been cratering. And the whole bear case
Don,
is that housing will bring down the whole economy.
What is your
done just the
GDP
opposite.
forecast?
The worse housing is done, the better the whole economy is done.
Don Luskin, you've been a natural resource stock player for quite some time. Let me ask you for an update on your thinking regarding the energy sector. In the light of the new news, Saudi Arabia is using its own oil for a change, as are some of the producers. Iraq may be producing a wee bit more. What's your take on the energy sector, Don?
Well, I'm a bull on inflation, and I'm a bull on global growth. And the energy sector is one of the places where those two things come together. And what I love about that is, you know, investing in energy is like flying an airplane with 2 engines, where if something bad happens to global growth and that engine falls off, you just know the inflation engine's going to rev even harder because Ben Bernanke is going to cut rates and cut rates and cut rates again to get global growth going back again. So you really can't lose in that sector right now. It's my favorite.
And Larry, it's playing off the weakness of the dollar on top of that.
Right, which is very, very true. But to me, that's just another way of saying inflation.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the cause and effect is on that, but we don't have time to debate that. Don, just as a follow-up, are you still buying the basic materials besides energy?
Yeah, same basic story. It's all just part of the same spectrum.
And